The silence was the worst part. It wasn't the silence of a quiet night in rural Wyoming. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of entropy. It felt manufactured, like the air itself had been pulled thin by some impossibly large vacuum. Elias Thorne, a man whose entire professional life had been devoted to managing the rhythmic, predictable roar of 60-cycle alternating current, bolted upright in his bed at precisely 3:17 a.m. on October 14, 1993. His digital clock display was black. A trivial detail, perhaps, but to Elias, a former chief substation supervisor who still monitored the region's energy flows out of habit, it was an aneurysm in the circulatory system of the entire county. The absence of the refrigerator hum, the deafening quiet of the central air fan that never truly shut off in the early fall, the dead ring on his landline when he instinctively tried to call the dispatch center. All of it screamed not of a local short, but of a catastrophic, widespread system failure. And catastrophic system failures, especially in this highly redundant section of the grid that fed military communication arrays further north, simply did not happen without precursor warnings or massive weather events. The night was clear, cold, and utterly still. He swung his feet onto the cold wooden floor, his pulse hammering against his ribs not from fear, but from a terrifying professional curiosity. This was his turf. He knew every relay, every capacitor bank, every aging transformer in the region by its serial number and its signature operational sound. Whatever had killed the grid had done so with surgical precision, bypassing all the automated fail-safes that he and his teams had spent decades installing and perfecting. He threw on heavy denim overalls and grabbed his massive, battered flashlight, a relic from his early days that contained enough battery power to illuminate a small stadium. Outside, the world was a canvas painted in pitch. The stars, usually muted by the faint orange glow of distant towns, were diamond-sharp and impossibly numerous, but even their cold, natural light felt wrong. There was no light pollution because there was no power anywhere. As he climbed into his old Ford pickup, the realization hit him with the weight of a physical blow. The failure was total, and it wasn't contained. He lived barely 3 miles from the main regional step-up substation, a fortified nerve center built during the Cold War era. If that facility was down, every town within a 100-mile radius was functionally blind. But the real terror, the thing that chilled him more than the cold Wyoming air, was the smell. As he cracked the window, a scent drifted in that was wholly unfamiliar and deeply disturbing. It was the sharp, metallic tang of ozone, yes, but mixed with something else, something chemical, almost sweet like burnt sugar and pulverized stone. It was the scent of colossal amounts of energy being handled improperly, violently, and instantaneously. Elias fumbled with the key, his hands sweating, forcing himself to breathe deeply. Logic dictated a lightning strike, a down pylon, a terrorist act perhaps. But the silence refuted everything. Lightning strikes are messy, preceded by storms. Terrorist acts are usually localized and noisy. This was immaculate destruction, and the unsettling certainty grew in his gut. The event that had murdered the power grid had come not from the ground, but from the heavens, and it was waiting for him in the substation. The drive to Substation 47 was usually a tedious, familiar 5 minutes of cruising down a paved county road flanked by endless barbed wire fences and dormant grazing land. Tonight, it was a descent into an abyss. Elias kept his speed slow, the high beams of the Ford biting weakly into the unnatural darkness. The beams seemed to stop just yards ahead of the truck, unable to penetrate the visual density of the starless black. He tried the radio. Dead air, just an aggressive, spitting static that momentarily made the truck's speaker scream before fading into a low, resonant thrum. This wasn't ordinary static. It felt rhythmic, almost subsonic, a frequency that vibrated the fillings in his teeth and made the cheap plastic dashboard rattle sympathetically. It was less a noise heard through the ears and more a pressure felt against the sternum. He pulled off the county road onto the gravel access lane leading to the substation perimeter, the tires crunching loudly, the only sound disrupting the pervasive hum. The chain-link fence, topped with 3 strands of razor wire, appeared abruptly in his lights. The main gate, typically secured by a sophisticated electronic lock and pressure sensor system, was slightly ajar, resting crookedly on its hinges. The lock mechanism, a heavy steel box designed to withstand small arms fire, was gone. Not broken or pried open, but absent, as if dissolved or cleanly removed by a colossal, invisible force. Elias killed the engine. The resulting silence was overwhelming, amplifying the deep, subterranean thrumming that seemed to originate from the heart of the facility itself. He grabbed his old service pistol from beneath the seat, an automatic reaction born of years dealing with vandals and territorial hunters, knowing deep down that whatever had caused this wreckage would not be deterred by a 9mm round. The massive transformer banks, usually buzzing like agitated hornets, were silent. He cautiously approached the administrative building, shining his beam through the dusty window. Inside, everything looked normal, but a thin, almost invisible shimmer seemed to be hovering just above the surfaces, a dust of energy perhaps. He moved toward the main equipment yard. This was where the terror shifted from professional concern to primal dread. As he rounded the corner of the auxiliary control shed, he saw it. Not the object itself, not yet, but the effect. A single, enormous 765 kV insulator stack, made of porcelain and standing 12 feet tall, lay shattered on the ground. But the break wasn't clean. The porcelain wasn't chipped or fractured by impact. It looked molecularly rearranged, melted into smooth, glassy slag right where the current would enter the core. And then he saw the light, or rather, the absence of light that illuminated itself. High above the far corner of the yard, where the main feeder lines disappeared toward the mountains, something massive was hovering. It was a perfect, unmoving shadow against the backdrop of the faint, distant stars, triangular in shape, but with soft, impossibly curved edges that defied geometric understanding. Along the leading edge of this colossal, silent wedge, faint, internal lights pulsed, not blinking like aircraft, but flowing, cycling through deep, unsettling colors, a slow, heavy pulse of violet, transitioning into an acidic green, and then settling momentarily on a deep blood orange. The object was absorbing the night, sucking light and sound into its mass. Elias instinctively dropped to a knee behind a concrete blast shield. His heart tried to escape his chest. He wasn't looking at a terrestrial machine. He was looking at the executioner of the grid. The scale of the destruction within the equipment yard transcended any conventional engineering failure. Elias crept closer, using the hulking concrete structures and the massive, inert circuit breakers as cover, his gaze fixed alternately on the silent, hovering craft and the physical devastation around him. What he saw was not the result of explosive force, fire, or stress fatigue. It was energy theft on an unimaginable scale. He reached the main transformer bank, the beating heart of the station. The enormous unit, which contained thousands of gallons of cooling oil, was still intact, but the metal casing was severely warped. He ran his gloved hand over the surface and pulled it back instantly. The metal was unnaturally cold, radiating a deep chill that seemed to defy the recent energy discharge. He trained his flashlight beam onto the primary feeder cables thicker than a man's torso, built to carry enough energy to power a small city. These cables were not severed. They were fused. The copper core hadn't just melted. It had vaporized along a clean, sharp line spanning about 2 feet. The insulating jackets looked crisped and brittle, but the metal itself told a story of instant, overwhelming energy transfer. Imagine taking all the electrical potential stored in that entire region and pulling it through a straw in a single microsecond. That was the signature he was seeing. There was zero evidence of arc flash, no carbon tracing on the ground, nothing to suggest a lightning strike or ground fault. This was energy harvested directly from the alternating current flow, completely bypassing the Earth. He knelt beside a large switching mechanism. The heavy steel housing, usually resistant to everything short of a direct tank round, bore 3 perfectly round indentations, each about the size of a dinner plate. They looked less like impacts and more like places where the metal had been pressed inward, while momentarily softened to the consistency of warm clay. He was examining the imprint when the subsonic thrumming intensified, vibrating the gravel beneath his knees so fiercely he nearly lost his balance. He glanced up quickly at the craft. It hadn't moved, but the lights had stopped cycling. They held steady on the aggressive, sickening green. A single point of intense, colorless light, like a pinprick in the fabric of reality, appeared beneath the center of the craft. It didn't project downward like a searchlight. It simply was dash, drawing the surrounding darkness into itself. Elias instinctively shut off his own flashlight, plunging himself into absolute blackness except for the eerie, powerful green glow emanating from above. He heard a sound then, a delicate, high-pitched whine, like the sound of gyroscopes spinning impossibly fast, ramping up in frequency until it hit a pitch beyond human hearing, settling back down into the grinding, bone-deep hum. He realized the craft wasn't hovering passively. It was working dash. He looked around wildly, scanning the transmission towers 50 yards distant. They were massive, lattice steel structures, each supporting tons of conductor wire. As he watched, the lines connecting two towers began to glow, not with the white heat of an overload, but with the same sickening, deep green as the lights on a craft. The light flowed along the wires, moving toward the substation equipment yard with incredible speed, a river of raw, harnessed energy being channeled directly into the silent, waiting apparatus above. He understood then. The grid hadn't failed. It had been drained dash. Every volt, every amp had been siphoned off by this impossible machine, leaving behind only the cold shell of industrial wreckage. The power outage wasn't a side effect of their presence. It was the entire point of their visit. They were feeding, and the entire infrastructure of rural America was their dinner plate. The process of energy siphoning intensified, and the air around Elias became heavy and electrically charged. The hair on his arms stood straight up, and the fillings in his teeth throbbed painfully in sync with the craft's internal thrum. He could feel the residual charge flowing through the ground, a faint tingling sensation running up through the thick rubber soles of his boots. He stayed low, pressed against the cold concrete of the blast shield, the terrifying grandeur of the scene unfolding above him. The craft, which he now estimated to be at least the length of 3 football fields, remained utterly silent in its movement, defying the laws of aerodynamics he'd spent his life trusting. The only sound was that deep, pressure wave hum and the soft, dry sizzle of the power lines surrendering their contents. The central light source beneath the craft widened slightly, shifting from a dimensionless point to a soft, focused column of brilliant white. This beam didn't hit the ground. It focused squarely on the junction point where the 3 main transmission lines terminated into the substation's primary bus bar. As the beam held steady, the glow on the wires diminished rapidly, the green retreating back toward the towers. The entity, whatever it was, had finished its meal. Elias felt a profound sense of violation, not just for the infrastructure, but for the fundamental security of his existence. These things didn't need permission. They didn't leave invoices, and they were using the very foundation of human civilization, its harnessed energy, as a consumable resource. The silence of the machine was more frightening than any roar could ever be, suggesting a mastery of physics so complete that vibration and noise had been entirely eliminated from its operation. Then, the focused white beam retracted instantly. The green perimeter lights snapped off. The colossal triangle of darkness shifted, not by banking or tilting, but by smoothly translating horizontally in the air, moving with the liquid grace of something floating in deep water. It moved directly over the main control building, pausing for perhaps 2 seconds, and then, without sound or warning, it accelerated. It didn't accelerate in the way an airplane fights against gravity and inertia. It simply vanished. One moment it was there, blotting out the cold, distant stars, and the next the stars were visible again, the light restored to the night sky. The sheer impossible speed of its departure left a momentary, visible distortion in the air, a shimmering heat haze, although the air felt instantly colder. The thrumming stopped. The oppressive silence of the dead grid was replaced by the natural, ordinary silence of a rural night. The chirp of crickets, the rustle of dry weeds in a faint breeze, the distant, mournful howl of a coyote. The natural world was trying to reclaim the space violated by the unnatural visitor. Elias didn't move for several minutes. He remained crouched, pistol still gripped tightly, eyes wide, staring at the empty space where the colossal machine had hung. The fear was slowly dissolving, replaced by a cold, metallic certainty that his life and his understanding of reality was permanently fractured. He stood up slowly, his knees stiff, the smell of ozone and burnt stone now overpowering the faint, sweet chemical scent that had accompanied the craft's presence. The total power outage lasted exactly 22 minutes and 41 seconds, timed precisely from when he woke up to the moment a distant, barely perceptible click announced the tripping of a backup generator on a far-off relay station. The grid, though crippled, was beginning the agonizing process of self-correction, struggling to breathe life back into the wires. But Elias knew, with an awful clarity, that the true damage wasn't to the copper and porcelain. It was to the collective ignorance humanity relied upon for its daily functioning. He had witnessed a theft of astronomical proportions, and the thief was non-human, silent, and terrifyingly efficient. Elias walked cautiously back toward his truck, the gravity of what he had witnessed settling in his bones like permafrost. His professional instincts, however, were still screaming for documentation. He retrieved a small, rugged camera he always kept in the truck, loaded with high-speed film, and began meticulously photographing the wreckage. He captured the melted insulator stacks, the vaporized cable ends, and especially those three inexplicable, deep impressions on the steel housing of the switching mechanism. As he was documenting the central transformer, he heard a faint crackling sound. It was the low, weak buzz of current trying to reestablish itself. The backup systems, designed to kick in within seconds, were finally stirring after whatever electromagnetic dampening field the craft utilized had dispersed. A single, weak floodlight flickered on the perimeter fence line, casting long, wavering shadows. The hum was returning, but it was frail, sickly, not the robust, reliable song of the grid he knew, but a wounded wheeze. As the current flow stabilized slightly, Elias felt a strange, momentary wave of profound clarity wash over him. It wasn't just that he'd seen a UFO, it was the realization of the motive dash. They weren't crashing. They weren't observing. They were resource harvesting, treating Earth's massive energy production as a ripe fruit to be periodically picked. In that focused, intense moment of overwhelming energy transmission, when the central white beam had locked onto the bus bar, had left him with a lingering, visceral impression. For a split second during that immense power draw, he felt utterly exposed, as if the craft had scanned him, categorized him, and dismissed him. He felt less like a witness and more like a microbial speck on the surface of their feeding ground. The suddenness of that realization, that silent, psychic connection to a non-human intelligence focused solely on consumption, terrified him far more than the noise or size of the craft. It stripped away all comforting notions of shared understanding or even conflict. They didn't see humanity as a threat or a target. They saw us as irrelevant. This chilling truth brought him to a halt, standing amidst the ruined equipment, looking up at the now innocent, starry sky. He thought of all the other power grid failures, the unconfirmed blackout events dating back decades, filed away as operator error or unforeseen atmospheric conditions. How many of those were actually silent, surgical removals by these colossal, dark harvesters? If they had been doing this for decades, what did they need the energy for? And why specifically our harnessed electrical current? Was there something in the AC frequency, something about the sheer volume of power we push through these massive lines that serve their unknowable purpose? We build our civilization on electricity, They come and take it whenever they please, leaving only confusion and bureaucratic denial in their wake. And that, dear viewers, leads us to a profound, unsettling question that cuts right to the heart of the enigma of our channel, America's UFO legacy. If these incidents, the widespread infrastructural events that defy conventional explanation, are indeed evidence of intelligent, non-human actors routinely draining our planet's energy resources, what does that say about the true vulnerability of modern society? Are we living in a sophisticated, highly regulated farm, unaware that our most essential resource is being perpetually cultivated and extracted by forces we cannot even perceive, let alone fight? Think about your reliance on power, on the comforting hum of your devices. If you had the power to investigate and confirm an event like this, knowing the implications could shatter the global economy and sow mass panic, would you reveal the truth, or would you keep the secret? Share your thoughts and theories below. I genuinely want to know how deep your skepticism or belief truly runs when the lights go out. The process of dialing 911 felt surreal. Elias was covered in ozone dust, adrenaline starting to ebb, leaving behind a cold, shaky exhaustion. When the dispatcher finally picked up, the voice was harried and stressed. "County emergency. We are overwhelmed. What is your status?" Elias, reverting to his professional demeanor, identified himself and stated the obvious. "We have a catastrophic failure at Substation 47. Large-scale structural damage consistent with a major electromagnetic pulse or targeted energy weapon. We need utility crews, armed security, and possibly federal assistance." "This is not a weather event, Janice." There was a pause on the line, punctuated by the frantic sounds of other incoming calls. "Elias, we are aware of the outage. Every station within a 100-mile radius is reporting simultaneous failure. We are currently labeling this an unspecified high-altitude atmospheric event. Stay clear of the equipment until daylight." "Janice, listen to me," Elias insisted, his voice low and urgent. "I was here. I saw the cause. It was a massive, non-terrestrial vehicle. Silent. Triangular. It drained the power completely." The response was immediate and chillingly smooth. Janice's voice, which had been stressed and familiar, suddenly became flat, devoid of emotion, and slightly distorted, as if a filter had been applied to the line. "Thank you for your report, Mr. Thorne. Due to the classified nature of this potential incident, your call is being transferred to a specialized regulatory authority. Please stand by." The resulting clicking sound was deafening. He was shunted into a holding pattern with sterile, synthesized music playing, a tune that felt far too cheerful for the scale of the disaster. After nearly 5 minutes of agonizing waiting, a new voice came on the line. It was male, deep, utterly neutral, and spoke with an unnerving lack of regional accent. "Mr. Elias Thorne, we appreciate your immediate report and assessment of the situation at Substation 47. You are confirmed as the first responder and primary witness. You are instructed to secure your location, take no further photographs, and await the arrival of the specialized investigation team. Under no circumstances are you to discuss the specifics of your observation, the lights, the configuration, or the speed, with local emergency services or media. This incident is now categorized under Executive Order 13637 as a matter of national energy infrastructure security. Cooperation is mandatory." The voice wasn't threatening, but the underlying authority was absolute, surgical in its deployment. Elias's paranoia, which had started as a flicker of suspicion, now became a bonfire of certainty. They already knew exactly what he had seen. The response time, the pre-scripted transfer, the immediate categorization. It was all too swift, too polished for a regional emergency. This wasn't the first time they had dealt with this. "Who am I speaking to?" Elias demanded, his voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage. "That information is need to know, Mr. Thorne. We know you are a seasoned professional. You understand the implications of panic and energy instability. We are sending an extraction team to collect data and ensure your safety. They will be there within 2 hours. Do you understand your instructions?" "I understand. Elias managed to rasp out, staring at the distant, crippled lines. The power was coming back now, sluggishly, fighting its way through the ravaged equipment. The sheer speed of the systemic response confirmed everything he feared. The government wasn't protecting the people from the phenomenon. They were protecting the phenomenon from the people. He hung up the phone feeling colder and more exposed than he had when a massive craft was hovering directly over his head. The extraction team arrived precisely 97 minutes later, pulling up the gravel lane in two unmarked, heavy black SUVs that looked startlingly out of place against the backdrop of pine trees and chain-link fencing. They weren't police. They weren't military in uniform. They were the archetype of the chilling government presence, the stuff of whispered legends and late-night radio shows. Three men, dressed in identical, impeccably tailored dark charcoal suits, despite the rural setting in the early hour. They wore no identifying badges. Their hair was short and neatly trimmed, and their faces held an unsettling placidity, expressionless masks of professional disinterest. Their leader, a tall, lean man with sharp, gray eyes, introduced himself only as Agent Kress. His handshake was firm, dry, and cold. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for your cooperation. We need to expedite this process." Kress didn't waste time on pleasantries or genuine inquiry. He was there to control the narrative and sanitize the scene. The first demand was for the photographs. "We require all visual documentation immediately, both the camera and the film." Elias hesitated, holding the battered SLR tightly. "I took these as part of my professional duty to document infrastructure damage." "Your duty has been superseded, Mr. Thorne," Kress stated calmly, gesturing slightly to one of his silent colleagues, who smoothly positioned himself between Elias and the path back to his truck. The implication of force was soft, but palpable. Elias handed over the camera. Kress didn't even look at it. He simply passed it to the third man, who opened a heavy, metallic briefcase and placed the camera and film roll inside, shutting the case with a final, ominous click. The conversation shifted to Elias's memory. Kress didn't ask what Elias saw. He told Elias what he saw. "Mr. Thorne, your testimony indicates you observed localized damage resulting from an unstable atmosphere plasma event, likely linked to the recent solar flare activity. The resulting electromagnetic pulse was responsible for the grid collapse and the observed light signatures. We understand the confusion and stress, but that is the official finding." "That's a lie," Elias countered immediately, his exhaustion giving way to stubborn fury. "I saw the craft. I saw the energy drain. The damage signature is consistent with engineered removal, not EMP. The insulators were melted from the core outward." Kress maintained his unnerving smile. Engineer Elias Thorne, 34 years experience, decorated service record. You are a valuable asset to this community. We understand your professional desire for accuracy, but accuracy, in this case, must be sacrificed for stability. We are offering you immediate paid administrative leave for 6 months. Full pay, full benefits. You are to relax, seek counsel if necessary, and refrain from discussing the events of this night with anyone who does not hold a security clearance higher than your own. The penalty for contravening this directive is not a job loss, Mr. Thorne. It is a loss of your personal liberty and possibly your freedom to continue residing in this country." He paused, allowing the implication to sink in, his gray eyes piercing. "We are restoring the power grid. We are cleaning the site. When the lights come back on fully, the incident will be over. You will confirm the official story. Do you accept the terms of our assistance?" The silence that followed was thick with menace. Elias realized he wasn't talking to investigators. He was talking to custodians of a secret, and they viewed him now not as a witness, but as a contaminated piece of data that needed neutralization. The forced 6-month administrative leave felt less like a vacation and more like a high-tech house arrest. Elias remained physically free, but psychologically bound and geographically isolated. The town, which had relied on him for decades, treated him with a confusing mix of pity and suspicion. The official story, plastered across the regional papers, was exactly what Kress had dictated: Massive system failure attributed to unforeseen atmospheric event. The news ran grainy pictures of the substation damage, emphasizing the structural chaos, carefully blurring out any details that might betray the unique nature of the molecular melting. Elias tried to talk to his old colleagues, but they either avoided him or recited the official line with a disturbing adherence to detail. He realized quickly that the intimidation had spread far beyond him. He spent the first few weeks consumed by a corrosive paranoia. Every phone call seemed monitored. Every passing unmarked car felt like a surveillance unit. He started sleeping only a few hours a night, waking up in a cold sweat, remembering the utter silence of the craft, the unnatural green glow, and the terrifying efficiency with which they had harvested the energy. He began to doubt his own sanity, wondering if the stress of managing the aging grid had finally snapped his tether to reality. Did I really see a football field-sized triangular shadow suck the energy from the wires? He would ask himself, staring at the peaceful, humming power outlets in his home. But then he would remember the cold shock of Cress's handshake, the terrifyingly smooth lie they constructed, and the memory of the metallic, sweet scent of ozone mixed with something alien. That scent was not a hallucination. To cope, Elias threw himself into theoretical research, seeking an explanation that could bridge the gap between his engineering knowledge and the impossible reality he witnessed. He started reading everything he could find on high-energy plasma containment, zero-point energy extraction, and even fringe theories on gravitational manipulation. He was searching for a physics that could explain how something that massive could move without sound or inertia and drain an entire power system without leaving thermal residue or massive explosive damage. His deep dive into obscure electromagnetic theory led him to a realization. The method of extraction had to be tied directly to the frequency of the current itself. They weren't just taking raw power, they were taking the organized, oscillating structure of the alternating current. He spent his days poring over archived schematics of Substation 47, looking for any anomaly he might have missed during the chaos. He needed a piece of physical evidence, something small enough to escape the clean sweep of Cress's team, something that could definitively prove that the damage was extraterrestrial and not some exotic military experiment. The pressure cooker of isolation began to warp his worldview. He stopped watching the news, convinced that every major global incident was a choreographed distraction from the real, quiet, ongoing operations of the non-human harvesters. He felt deeply, horribly alone, trapped between an undeniable truth and a global conspiracy of silence enforced by men in cheap suits. The world kept turning, the lights stayed on, and everyone chose comfort over the terrifying implications of the truth that Elias Thorne held captive within his own mind. He knew he had to act, not just for his sanity, but because if they came back, and if they continued to harvest, eventually the grid wouldn't be able to recover. Elias's meticulous review of the substation schematics and the historical maintenance logs, done secretly on an offline computer, led him back to a forgotten detail about the perimeter fencing. Substation 47, due to its proximity to an older military base, was equipped with an obscure, experimental microwave detection system integrated into the chain-link fence, a system long deemed too unreliable and powered down, but never physically removed. The sensor nodes were hidden inside the tubular steel posts supporting the fence, tiny copper coils designed to detect small variances in localized microwave background radiation. When Cress's team had come through, they would have focused on the visible wreckage and the power conduits. They likely missed the relic sensors embedded in the fence structure. Elias waited 3 weeks, allowing the initial heat from the investigation to dissipate, forcing himself to appear relaxed and compliant, even spending long, awkward hours fishing down by the river. Finally, under the cover of a freezing late November fog, he drove back to the substation perimeter. The site was now secured by new, heavily armed private security guards, not the local, bored rent-a-cops, but professionals. He parked a mile down the road and proceeded on foot, moving through the thick scrub brush, relying on his 30 years of navigating that rugged terrain in the dark. He found the section of the fence he was looking for, near where the enormous craft had hovered and initiated the drain. He had to assume that the concentrated electromagnetic field generated by the draining process might have affected these old, forgotten sensors. Working swiftly with a specialized toolkit, a necessity for a retired engineer, he silently pried open the cover panel on one of the steel fence posts. Inside, the copper coil was visible. It wasn't physically damaged, but its color was wrong. Copper is supposed to be bright, metallic brown. This coil was infused with a faint, iridescent blue sheen that pulsed almost imperceptibly in the light of his small headlamp. More importantly, lodged deep within the housing, resting against the induction coil, was a sliver of foreign material. It was tiny, no bigger than a grain of rice, but visible against the dull interior of the post. Elias carefully retrieved it using a pair of non-metallic tweezers and sealed it immediately in a small, sterilized vial he had brought. The shard was smooth, heavy for its size, and felt unnaturally cold, even when held in the palm of his gloved hand. He knew instantly this was what he had risked everything for. It was evidence that couldn't be dismissed as EMP residue or atmosphere plasma. He retreated back into the fog, moving like a phantom, the silent power of the humming grid his unwitting accomplice. Back home, in the safety of his garage workshop, Elias performed a crude but effective series of metallurgical and chemical tests on the shard. The results were impossible. The material showed no known crystalline structure. It was resistant to his most powerful chemical solvents, and when subjected to a small